But yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone online. I think I'll start by first introducing myself. I guess also just a quick audio check with the folks online if they can hear me.
We can hear you.
All right, very good. And yeah, I'll first actually start by introducing myself. I'm Chris Nelson. I'm the current chair of OMSC. I'm the manager of the Transportation Planning and Analysis Unit. For some folks that I've not met, and some folks online I have not met. I started in this position about 8 months ago, replacing Brian Dunn, and also kind of for some kind of updates too on the OMSC leadership. And again, I'm the chair, and Peter Bosa is the vice chair. I also wanted to highlight another change. Matt Finn is now also part of the executive committee as well. I think another change since the last time as well is Joe Broach from Metro now heading the travel survey subcommittee. So I guess it makes sense to do introductions, a quick introduction. I think that does make sense because I do feel like there's some other folks online. So again, I'll just kind of go around the room. Feel free to introduce yourself and also, you know, your role or participation with OMSC. So actually might go, I guess, the other way. Sorry. Let's start with Alex here.
Alex Bernardi. I'm the modeling team at ODOT TPOW, and a part of the OMSC.
Peter Bosa with travel forecasting at Metro. As Chris mentioned, I am the OMSC vice chair, executive committee vice chair.
Joe Broach, also work with Peter at Metro Forecasting, and I am the chair of the Travel Service.
Garth Aponitis with DKS Associates. I'm not part of OMSC, but I am part of the OMSC coordinating.
I'm Matt Finn. I'm the relatively new manager of the modeling and forecasting group at Metro.
Carol Richardson, OMSC coordinator.
Joe.
Tim Sepinar, part of it. Becky Knudsen, I'm with ODOT TPOW. So I work for Chris Nelson and with Alex Bernardi, and I'm a member of the executive committee, and I'm also the chair of the modeling program coordination subcommittee.
Bree Jackson, Medwillamette Valley Council of Governments, Salem NPO.
Cody Meyer, Department of Land Conservation and Development. Dylan Hoover, ODOT Climate Office.
Dr. Horowitz with TPOW at ODOT, CFAC Implementation Engineer.
Thank you all. I think we could try to do this also virtually. Carol, I'm not sure what's the best way to do that.
So let's see, we only have a couple people online, so maybe I just follow your name and you can introduce yourself to the group. Robert Kohler.
Hey everybody, Robert Kohler here. I'm a professional transportation planner, work at AirSage.
Robert, Joel Friedman.
Hi, all. Joel Friedman here with RSG in Portland. It's nice to see everyone in one room together again.
Chris Johnson, do I see you on there?
Yes, you do, Carol. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Chris Johnson, former Metro modeler, former OMSCer, now with Nelson Nygaard.
And Lewis Lynn. And Lewis, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Probably forgot to unmute. So Leming Wang, associate professor at Portland State. I'm also one of the coordinator of OMAC. Thanks.
Josh Roll.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh Roll. I'm a research analyst with ODOT's research unit.
Chen Chu.
Hi, I'm Xun Qu. I'm work for ODOT TSM unit.
Eric Main.
Good afternoon, Eric Main, Oregon Health Authority, Environmental Public Health.
Sean? Sean,
Oh, that's me. Dayon Didich. I'm a senior transportation analyst with ODOT TPOW, working with alongside Becky and Alex and Chris.
Thank you. Sorry to butcher your name. Steve Kelly,
Steve Kelly with Washington County.
Nick Forty,
Hey, Nick Forty with the Federal Highway Administration.
did I miss anyone?
Is it just me, or is there a way to speak close to the mic or turn up the volume in the room?
No.
I'm afraid we'll try to project.
Okay. Anyway, I'm here. I'm Lewis from the Port of Portland. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Louis.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to. The mic is in the ceiling, so I might just talk. I'm kind of a quiet guy, so I'll talk into the ceiling like the Lord. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, of course, for your time. I did want to have a unfortunate announcement again that Peter Hurley from the DOT again passed away. I was just kind of curious too, if how many people in the room have worked with Peter? Okay, wow. Okay. So I think we might just have just a few moments of silence for Peter and thank you for that. Always tragic and well, also reflective of your own life and your own family. Again, welcome everybody. I think I'll start going through the agenda, going next to the general business item. And I don't think we'll do an official vote, but did just kind of make sure that folks, I think, got the minutes beforehand. Again, if anyone had any corrections to the past meeting minutes or have anything to add, let us know here. Again, I probably won't take a formal vote, but if there's any addition. Good. I don't need to call on you all as you just arrived, but that is probably a good time to also just introduce yourself. Sorry. Again, it's very quickly. Teresa and
Carol Widener from ODOT Climate Office. Teresa Conley with ODOT Statewide Planning, helping to implement the CPAC program. Thank you.
Then some other announcements. One being marking your calendars for the next meeting, which will be October 18th. I think we're kind of still deciding on what that will look like, but again, I think in person in this hybrid format is great. I'm sure it'll be something like that. But again, mark your calendars. October. Costume, sure.
Early.
Yeah, you have plenty of time to start thinking about your costume. Yeah, I'll have a costume theme. I'm kind of going right along. Also kind of announcing some upcoming conferences. I probably won't go through each one of these in the agenda. But I might highlight a few of them. One being the TRV conference, the Innovations in Travel Analysis Planning, which is June 4th through 6th. I wanted to highlight that from my understanding that kind of a combination of two previous TRV conferences. One relates to innovations in travel modeling, and then one the planning applications conference. Actually, I was just kind of curious to see who is planning to attend that from our group.
And Jen is also going to go with Mark.
Okay, very good. So we have a good showing for that.
I bet you there's a handful on the call too.
Oh, is this Zoom or is this Zoom? Okay. Not sure if there's hand raising.
Oh, Chris.
Oh, there you go. There it is. All right, good. Good representation for that. Nick, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the Pacific Northwest Regional Economic Conference at all, or either way, it's.
So I think getting it on the agenda is enough for everyone to withstand, given that I'm the only economist. Who cares? But it has interesting stuff, and I will bring back things to this group that's relevant in the future.
Sounds good. I think I'll just highlight one more, the ITE annual meeting, just because it's in Portland this year. That does rotate across the country. I think it's a little bit more focused, on like operational modeling and kind of traditional, mobility and safety analysis, engineering analysis. But I was also just curious here if for folks that might be planning on attending that, just kind of see. Very good. I know you all doing actually some CPEC roundtable.
Yeah. Cody and I are both going to be on the panel, along with a fellow from California and Paul Lippman from Victoria Falls, is talking about CFAC, but also B&T generally.
That sounds good. And I think I'll just stop here too to see if anyone else had any other meetings or conferences they wanted to share that might not have been mentioned there.
Just a note, in Salem on Tuesday, May 23rd is the ODOT ACEC conference. So geared towards consultants, but I believe it's sort of an all-day group of sessions. Teresa and I will be making a presentation. So anyway, that's another one, at least in town.
Anyone online want to, again?
I've lost my screen, so they should still be able to see you guys.
Oh, okay. I guess also for the folks online, I guess there is a hand raising feature, but yeah, feel free to, again, if you have something to share that, or if you want to raise your hand. Okay, very good. I think I'll just honestly keep going through.
I'm sorry.
Okay, sounds good. I think again, I'll go to the next item on the agenda, which is the subcommittee updates. So I'll invite the chairs to brief report on the recent activity. It's like thank you the modeling program coordination.
Slides are coming. They had my prompts, yeah. So Carol has spoiled me. I don't have to remember anything. I just look at my slides. Still not showing. So the modeling program coordination committee meets the morning prior to these meetings twice a year, and we also meet quarterly. So in 3 months we'll meet again. So we meet 4 times a year, and we had our last meeting early March. And we met this morning too. I'll talk about that. And then we also met early last March. And let's see. I guess to describe who we are, I should start there. We're a group of people that are interested in modeling in that practitioner application sense, and work together on areas that we have common interest. And we also are responsible as a standing committee to continue implementation and adoption of goals and objectives that were identified through ad hoc committees that had a very specific mission. They completed their work and then had recommendations. So we are here to implement things like that. Examples of that is the GHG subcommittee, as well as the former freight subcommittee. So next slide. Within our subcommittee, we've identified people who are topic leaders and not necessarily experts, but they are responsible for keeping us apprised of information related to their topic area. For example, we right now are going to be learning all about CFEC, climate-friendly areas. That's a new area for us. Land use forecasting has always been on the list, but we're kind of short of tools and methods related to that. But I believe the CFEC work is an opportunity for us to gain some ground in that area. At least we hope so. And that relates to the model data input. That's really key to our models being useful, is that we've got to put good information into them in order to forecast something that's most likely to occur, and play around with different fundamental assumptions and uncertainty analysis. And we also have topic lead for GHG analysis and freight. Pardon me? And now we have an equity topic lead. Yeah, that's brand new. So we're excited. We talked about that this morning in our meeting. And that's Joel Gordon from Metro, who we've never met before. And he is a gold mine of information. We're going to be bothering him a lot. We did add a new thing to our kind of standing agendas every time, where we share examples of application or analysis that we've done using our models. We've never really done that. So we don't know what questions, ODOT's being asked and that we address with our tools versus, other agencies. And it's all different and it can be subtle. So we can learn from each other from these different examples of analysis and ways to trick our models into doing what we want them to do to answer the question. So there's art and science here. This morning we talked about, what did we talk about this morning? A lot. That's why I have to look at my notes to remember what we talked about. We had updates on our different topics related to some research studies, and then we had an overview of the freight plan and what came out of that, which will be adopted in a few months, as I understand it. And a little bit of update on the travel survey. So there'll be updates like that here today for you. We learned more about the climate-friendly and equitable communities. We're going to need to have a working group of people from the MPC to help ODOT come up with guidance for TSP development and analysis related to the CFE rules. So that's a new area that we're going to all be working together as a team. It's just one of those days. Everyone has been home for a long time and not meeting in person, so why not the laptop? Let's see, what did I cover? We did get to see a really interesting application example from Metro is related to some scenario analysis related to tolling. An update on other things. You're also going to get updates from your subcommittee chairs. And frankly, as far as the meeting 3 months ago, that one I cannot do by memory. We do plan on meeting again in July, and we always make sure we have full agendas. There's plenty of things to talk about, and if anyone has anything happen or come up and want to talk about things, we put it on the agenda. But tentatively, there's some work being done related to heavy and medium trucks. Hopefully there'll be some findings that we can talk about and learn from. Also, information about integrating the TNC data, the ride share and the ride services like Uber and Lyft into the GHG models, which is really challenging when you don't have very much data. So it always comes down to data availability. We'll have an example application from the Bend MPO with Tyler. And reflect on everything discussed today and identify action items and move forward make progress that way. So I think that's it for me. And then hopefully everything is smooth and Alex's will be easy. There you go.
So I'm Alex Bernardi, I'm getting on the technical tools subcommittee work. Like Becky was saying, I think, Becky and I have been working on this. We've identified that the MVC is maybe a little bit more on the application side, the use of the tools and how, and also development. But I think tech tools was stood up for a variety of reasons, but I think it's really kind of focusing on that developing the tool side a little bit more than how they're used. So there's a handful of things working underneath tech tools as they're kind of ad hoc items that need OMSC attention that we've been firing up, and we kind of bring subject matter experts into those conversations kind of as needed based on what the specific pieces that we're working on. We've got a handful of things in the fire. The first two are related to supplementing the Oregon Household Survey. As we were launching the Household Survey, we recognized that the calibration year for most of Oregon's models using the survey will be around that survey time. And so we worked on getting a count program alongside the survey to supplement it. That count program has been occurring for the past couple of years and will continue into the future. And so we now have kind of a beta process to pull the counts that are being put into that database by whatever geography is defined, but for this group, that likely be MPO boundaries, MPO model boundaries. And so we're still in the development phase of extracting of the best way to extract those counts, but there is an extraction process. So anyone that wants to be an early tester, we can get them counts, and they can see what the counts look like now, but they can also get counts are continuing to be added to that system. So like in 24, maybe when people start using the survey, we can do polls then as well, and they'll have all the 23 and initial 24 counts. Also to supplement the survey, we had a contract with PTV to pull down OpenStreetMap and add on an average weekday snapshot of the state's GTFS routes. So all the transit routes in the state for kind of an average Wednesday in October of 2022. So all those routes are on the network, as well as linking on TMC and XD codes to pull in travel time reliability data onto the network, and ODOT's linear mile referencing system and MilePoint information to bring over state asset information to the OpenStreet network. So the idea is that at least for ODOT, and it's OpenStreet, so we can provide it to anyone that's interested. But so at least for ODOT's purposes, that's going to be the starting point for our next generation of models, is to use that all-street network, that OpenStreet all-street network. It's OpenStreetMap, so it's not going to be perfect for our modeling needs, but we'll be refining that into the future. And the idea with the travel time reliability data onto that network is that we don't necessarily have to have, in order to augment our survey records, we can use observed travel time as opposed to model travel time to get some of that information associated with our survey records. That's kind of the thought there. And just like the count data, we can pull, or we can provide. I'm still in the QC process of reviewing that deliverable from PTV, so people can wait for me to say that I think it's quality, or it's also freely available now. It'll just take a month or two for me to get to the point where I think that there's no bugs in it, or I think that it's ready to go. Knowing that it'll still need cleaning, but that it's shareable at any point. It's shareable with people that are interested. For a number of years now, there's been an emerging tech conversation that kind of started around connected autonomous vehicles, 5+ years ago within the OMSC, MPC, and has now kind of evolved a little bit more into an emerging tech conversation that Nick Meltzer has helped lead. Right now we took a little bit of a pause. We have Kittleson, ODOT's got Kittleson under contract. They're helping bring the HCM, connected autonomous vehicle updates into our analysis. There's a lot of acronyms I could be saying, so I'm trying to spell everything out. Into the analysis procedures manual, the APM, and also the our modeling guidance. So right now, the Kittleson work is happening through June. So we took a little pause on the emerging tech conversation as Kittleson's work wraps up at the end of June for I don't think it'll solve how we do modeling work in emerging technology, but it will help us to take another step or two forward. And the tech tools, the emerging tech work group will meet again in July-ish to kind of see it, like to discuss, okay, what were we left with and what are the next steps with the emerging tech conversation. So that's happening. There was a little side conversation during the break here around big data sources. A while back, Joe Broach helped to start to catalog all the big data sources that are becoming available. That list has become a little bit stale, if that's fair. And so we have Josh Roll at ODOT, similarly, who's been, I'm sure a number of us have been keeping our finger on the pulse, but Josh Roll in ODOT research has been particularly involved in evaluating some of these big data sources. And so we don't have an exact start date, but Josh will be starting to update that catalog and that understanding and bringing back updates to the OMSC. So we've got that underway. The big one that I folded there at the end is that kind of a year to two-ish years in the making. We now have official notice to proceed as of April 10th on a design contract that will be running alongside the survey collection. And so the next generation of Oregon travel demand models will be getting a design over the next year, and then as the survey becomes available, we'll hopefully be able to roll into estimation following that design. So that's very exciting. We have the kickoff tomorrow for that discussion, and to supplement that, it was in my notes here at the urging of Peter Hurley. I think he had the right idea. Originally in the Tech Tools Charter, I put off that the metrics conversation would come after we had figured out the design of the ABM, and we had something that we would basically have something like MCE, where we would be summarizing results on the backside of this tool, and we figure out those metrics at the end after the design was done. Peter very correctly urged that you really want to have that metrics conversation at the time of the design, and so based on that urging, we fired up 30 or so subject matter experts across 6 different discipline areas to start having that metrics conversation. We kicked that off in February. We're about 2 months in, starting to frame up what those core metrics are that we should be prioritizing and focusing on, and those metrics conversations are going to flow back into the design discussion, so that hopefully by the time the design's done and we're moving into estimation, we've covered as many of those desired metrics that we're getting questions on as possible. Those are the big items that we're working on. Pretty much all. There's not much left hanging. I've cataloged all this. Not just big items. That's all. And so then looking ahead, just a re-summarization of where we're headed. So there's going to be significant work over the next year on that design contract. That's going to be a big, huge piece. And right alongside it is that metrics piece, making sure that we are feeding, understanding any metric. We got not a shadow, but when you have a hole and you're not aware of that hole, I forget. Blind spot. Making sure we're closing all the blind spots on our from our tool design perspective, from the metrics that are kicking out. Those are the two, I'd say, the biggest efforts that are going to be happening over the next 6 months and year. Then, like I said, we've got Kittleson's next steps. We've got Kittleson's work wrapping up in June, and the emerging tech conversation will relaunch, I think, in a pretty meaningful way after that. Coming up, we have Oregon's transportation plan is in its final kind of stages of public review. It'll be getting hopefully a little bow on it. And over the summer, we hope to also put a bow on the assumptions that we put together on the modeling side, the analysis side for the OTP, and bring that back to the group for kind of for the group's feedback and thoughts. With the idea, like there were a lot of assumptions around future vehicle fleet, things like that, that we want to see if people like agree with, and ideally we'd all be kind of adopting, I guess, kind of thought there. And then, like I mentioned, we're still collecting counts. That's going to keep happening, and those are available as requested, as well as the network. And on the charter for tech tools are peer reviews, and so we don't have any scheduled, but the last bullet there is facilitating any peer reviews as needed and requested.
Before going to Joe, I was just going to mention one thing about the Oregon Transportation Plan. Yeah, the intent is that has to be adopted by the Oregon Transportation Committee, the OTC. The intent is to get adoption during their July meeting. So a little bit of a context of that timeframe too. But with that, I'll hand it over to Joe Broach for his subcommittee.
I have one question for Alex too, actually, before I guess, since we're doing okay on time. Could you talk a little bit more about where you see that new network going in the future? Like, was it kind of a one-off proof of concept, or is there a plan to maintain, update? We're really interested in it.
Sure.
For obvious
Sure.
reasons.
Yeah. So the bare minimum, I guess, it's a one-off effort. Back in the last OHAS, we did something similar. We had a network that we purchased. It was kind of a snapshot in time. We used that as our starting point for a lot of our 2010 kind of models that came out of the last survey. So I think that's the minimum threshold. I think we all share similar interest and desires, and like kind of do we have to restart this each time? I've had a handful of conversations, since 2010 around that, and where they start to break down is that OSM, and well, I might be going into too much context here, but there's TriMet got away with OSM because TriMet is not the road authority. And so the road authorities need the control to be able to state this is what is on the road, and they can't have people tinkering with that. So it breaks down fast when you want to have like a single source of authoritative information, because the road authority says, I'm going to hold that, and I don't really have time to put that as a duplication for me to put it up on OSM.
Yeah.
So it kind of becomes, okay, well, does the modeling world, kind of like TriMet does, well, we're not the road authority, so do we have a network? And I have some hopes that, maybe we can all, so OHAS augmentation is going to be a big deal. And hopefully we have pretty common ways that we're going to augment the survey to have this pretty joint estimation. And so maybe if we're going to make improvements to this network, can we do it in such a way that we can kind of, push our improvements back? ODOT would greatly benefit from that from the statewide model perspective. If we had a network that the OMSC was updating, that would be huge for us. But these conversations always get really heavy as you start to hang extra desires onto it, and then I usually see them. Well, I've only seen them crush into the weight, but I've yet to see us successfully have legs strong enough to lift that. But I'm all for it.
Might that be where ODOT joining Overture could be an interesting proposition, since Overture is sort of looking to provide a corporate control to an OSM base map?
Yep, possibly. Yeah, we were talking a little bit this on the way down to lunch. That's an interesting, element that I have not thought up to this point. So the context before things like Overture, Washington made an attempt, and to organize all of the cities and the counties and the state that was a task, a position in itself, or multiple positions, just not even collecting the data, just to keep everyone on the same page and organize. And as soon as the champion in Washington left, the unified network immediately tanked because there was no person holding it all together. So I'm all for continuing to explore. I don't want to shut anyone's dreams down. I guess I'm shutting your dreams. So we would need to start talking probably to Chris Wright or something, and then he kind of funnels out to cities and counties a little bit. But there's so many people to start to try and if it's going to be like a true authoritative, it's a little bit different. Modeling get away with just kind of does it look good from like way back on that wall? It doesn't have to look good when you
But no, it's good to know that there's the door's still open a crack to it being beyond a one shot. And you know, one place that this conversation could reopen is if we're ever successful in getting OHAS being a regular sort of role.
Oh, yeah, that could be a
To
big deal,
match it
right?
to that cycle, and that would be the answer to do it. Maybe that would give us.
The other piece of energy that might help is, are you gonna point to them too, the multimodal?
Yeah,
networks?
exactly, the multimodal inventory,
Right.
seems like the proper place. I have questions about that.
So a lot of opportunities. I don't want to delay us, but we'll have to continue that conversation. I don't want this network to get lost because to us, it's a big and important effort. We've been looking for what direction to go to maintain our network.
Yeah, well, I would love to talk at any point in time, multiple times, as much as you guys want.
Right.
University help you?
Maybe.
Throwing more people at it.
Grants.
Yeah, they are.
And I apologize, I've been a pretty poor facilitator. I didn't take a break between Becky's updates either, if there was any questions or anything like that, before moving on to Joe's. We'll just.
All right, so I'm going to give you an update from the travel survey subcommittee, and of course, we are the ones tasked with collecting our travel behavior data for the state that primarily has come in the form of this every so often statewide household survey. As you were just hearing, that could change in the future. The state of the practice is kind of changing to more of a rolling survey that happens more often, catches trends that we've obviously, you know, we just missed TNC last time, and now we're dealing with the fallout of the pandemic this time. That's the problem with doing it once every so often. And honestly, we've been touching base so much with our subcommittee. Was our last formal subcommittee meeting in December? Did we have one? I think it was. We've been together since then.
When we did the outreach findings just a month or so ago.
Okay, I guess that was a meeting too. Yeah, so we got together to hear some reach financial survey that we'll hear about here. We'll go to the next one. And so just to introduce you to the broader team, there's me and then Kelly Clark from LCOG. They've been administering the contract, wrangling all the MPOs together for one budgetary unit. That's a lot of work. It's been a big lift, but it's been really successful, I think, overall, saving us all a lot of work in our individual agencies. And then, of course, Becky, she's been making OHAS work for a long time, and I don't know how OHAS is going to survive without her one day, but we'll keep her on as long as we can. And then we thought Chris Johnson was on the phone. Chris Johnson was in my seat for most of this survey development process, and so, you know, any complaints or critiques about the survey should go to him. No, we really appreciate the work that Chris did, and he got off to such a great start. And now I'm kicking myself for not getting a survey mailed to him, but maybe he'll be randomly selected.
I'm feeling lucky.
Great to have him here. So the big news is that data collection has officially begun. There are households actively collecting data right now in the state. I wouldn't say we're holding our breath, but it's something new. We're kind of getting some butterflies maybe. I do this way. This is a brand new process, and it's pretty exciting. This is our pilot. And ahead of the pilot, as Carol was just mentioning, we got the subcommittee together sort of short notice, and we got to hear from reports from some sub-consultants. One thing we did, which was really cool, is we did some targeted outreach to traditionally hard to reach populations for the survey. And so we had 3 focus groups around the state, and then an online bulletin board kind of focused discussion that was designed to reach outside of our urban areas, state, or outside of MPO areas. Pilot survey started a couple of weeks back, and that one, so that even though it's we say small, but it's going to be around 150,000 mailings to households around the state, randomly selected. So the whole state is in the pilot, you know, and we're, you know, this is part of what we're learning in the pilot is what the response rate is, but we're estimating or aiming for around 3,000 complete surveys from this pilot round. Now, it's roughly 15% of the random part of the sample, and there's some oversample also. The main survey, then the bulk of the collection will happen this fall in 2023, and there'll be more outreach to a lot of you guys, to MPOs and local partners around getting the word out when the big one hits. That shouldn't have said that in Oregon when the big survey launches. We don't want that in our during our travel survey for sure. And then we'll be wrapping up in spring 2024, and in between we'll be kind of applying the lessons we've been learning, or the things we've been finding out about how people respond to surveys post-pandemic, and it was already changing pretty rapidly, just due to the move away from landlines towards cell phones and other means of communication, and then the pandemic. We don't quite know what it did, but we're finding out, and our consultant has enough experience that we had a head start. And if we go to the next slide, because I'll talk about this a bit more later. This is just a reminder slide that this is going to be a little different if you've been a data user, or if you were part of the previous OHAS effort. This is a big shift. So we're going from 1-day collection to 7-day for the majority of households. It's a hybrid approach that households opt in to smartphone or web, and they're kind of pushed towards the smartphone version for the 7-day collection. We're going to have full GPS data with routes for every mode, every trip that smartphone collected, and then we're doing quite a bit on. There's a two-prong approach to reach those hard-to-reach households. One is our sample design. We've got quite a few things that are making sure that we oversample in areas that we expect to participate at lower levels, and tweaking the incentive structure. And then we've got this focused outreach, both before the survey, so we can tweak the recruitment design, but then also we'll be going back to them before the next survey collection, the community partners, and just making them aware that this survey is happening, and we want participation from everyone in Oregon. And if you can, encourage your constituents to participate, that's great. And then we're also planning, there are questions on there already that are so some of these new topics, working from home, online shopping, e-commerce, bicycling attitude, things we need in our modeling stream that we're setting up some questions for planned follow-on surveys. We haven't completely decided on exactly which surveys are going to follow on, but there's an option to opt in to participate in future surveys, and then we'll hopefully have some of those following on the main survey. And we go to the next one. And so right now in the pilot, one thing we're doing is, rather than just crossing our fingers and hoping response rates are about what we think, we're going to do some tests for different options to see how we can kind of get the most bang for our survey buck, and get, our goal is sort of to shift the money away from mailing costs. It's a lot. There's still a lot of paper and mailing costs involved in one of these presented surveys, and toward incentives to get more people to pay. You can kind of see the split here. You can see the 40-30-30 split. So 40% of households are going to get the traditional letter in an envelope. It looks really professional, nice. And then they'll get a reminder postcard. I got mine within about a week, or a little less. And then we're also testing 2 different incentive structures for each of these mailing options. So kind of a low and a high, but it varies by your participation style and what group you're in. And then 30% each of the remaining are going to get a kind of medium-sized postcard, and then a larger, both color glossy postcards without the mailing, without the reminder, which saves a lot of mailing costs. I mean, a whole lot. It's a surprising amount that it saves. And we're going to test and see, see how those work. And we're going to look not only at overall response rates, but kind of drill down to be sure that even if something is getting us better response for our dollar, overall, if it's not getting those groups that are most important for us to reach, we might think about a hybrid approach in fall, or maybe just going with more traditional. That's what's going on now. We're going to learn this, and then we're going to tweak the fall recruitment. Probably, well, hopefully for simplicity, there'll be a clear winner, and we can go with that option that's going to get us to our households and get more incentives than the household paying for paper. Yeah.
I was just curious, RSG, the firm doing this, have they done this kind of testing already, or is this like initially?
They have, and they were able to show us some numbers from North Carolina collection that they did in conjunction with the university there. And they were even able to drill down and show us demographics, and the postcards for much lower cost performed as well as the letter in those cases, and they weren't seeing any significant, kind of differences in response by demographic groups. The demographic groups are kind of coarse, as I recall, so we're gonna look. More closely at that.
Just be like a little more detail, kind of confirming. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll see if, and then that was, I don't remember when that one, what was going on. Do you remember?
It wasn't super recent.
No, it wasn't. It was a while back.
There were reasons that they were.
Yes, exactly. Different context and then a different time.
And then the focus group was all too. We had other.
Good question. I should have mentioned that.
On the postcard, there's the letters. Does it say the incentive amount on it, or is that based on where you're obviously zip code? Or
Does it say on it? I know it says that there is an incentive, but because the screening questions determine partially
when they call,
which incentive you're going to get.
so
Exactly.
they don't know. Oh, this could be a $30 incentive.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have like a little banner that says gift cards.
Okay, yeah, I just didn't know recall how that was being done. If it was on.
I know it's a little tricky with the different ones too. Yeah.
Because it would be interesting also, when they get the do not want, call but decide not to participate is, how much money do they want?
But a lot of the incentive purpose is to retain them, not as much as recruit them. So, we'll see that. But don't drop out.
And invitations are only coming by mail. They're not, it's not.
For the random sample, yes. For some of the over samples like university transit, if some of those will likely go out via email with the entire random sample from that master file, so that we have the.
Yeah.
So 150,000.
Yeah.
And you want to capture 3,000, so that's a 2%. Is that typical for?
It's on the lower side of traditional, but in the new, lately, I mean, some of the university studies I've been involved with been as low as 1 or 1.5% for these just kind of cold mailing. But yeah, the past, I feel like travel surveys have more been like 3 to 5% of my memory, but that's going back to when they were also doing dialing as well. It's hard to compare.
And the consultant also noted that the response rates are a little bit higher post-COVID.
Yes.
So we're hoping that works for us too.
Although interesting, it was reported at TRB that people have been seeing a bias in response toward people working from home, which makes sense, right? So someone who has the time and flexibility to work from home from their desk in front of the internet, yeah, they're more likely to take it home. So it's a new category that I have to start thinking about waiting for. Yeah.
Have you guys thought of a way of, because we already had one person ask to participate because they read it online or they saw it, whatever, that we send out, they want to participate. And I said, sorry, I realized it seems easy at this point that, yeah, we can put them in because we haven't hit any of the bins, right? And then it's we get people in, it's just another person in that bin we don't have to worry about.
Yeah, but we have to have that denominator of where we send the mailing to that specific, block group. And if we had unlimited funds, of course, we'd just say yeah, and we put them in another pool, right? But yeah, it's we're the consultant especially is always nervous about that, getting out too broadly or on some some big blog or an influencer like you do. So. I think we could jump to the next. And you also notice, I should say, that last role with what I was mentioning, that there is going to be a kind of boosted incentive after the household goes to that screening if they fall into one of our hard to reach income, racial, other area type categories. So here is that. This is the small of the postcard. This is smaller. Well, it's hard to know, but this looks smaller than it looks in your hands for the mailbox in the United States. You can see the language is front and center. We we took the, the most common non-English languages in some of our larger videos. Made sure we had some text actually in that language on the card to make it more appealing. Spanish, you can see a lot of it is translated directly on the card. Made some tweaks to it based on the focus group findings to make it a little more inclusive, feel more inclusive on the front. And I think the whole thing looks really good. It stood out. We all got courtesy copies in the mail, and my wife brought it to me, and so that was a good sign that she doesn't bring me all the gutter offers. I gotta get on that ladder so we can get those. Yeah. So some households are getting this one, some are getting a larger postcard, and then one. So I mentioned we got to hear a great presentation the subcommittee did from the focus group and bulletin board feedback, and we're also getting a deliverable that's a memo summarizing those findings. And I think this is going to be a great living document that we'll go back to, both to the extent we can to understand and tweak recruitment for this survey, but then for future surveys to go back and reread it. They got some really rich information from both the focus groups and bulletin boards. Just some things you would expect and some things you wouldn't. I think we learned we kind of knew, but learned again that we've got to do a better job of making it clear who this is coming from and what it's going to be used for, even though to us, we were trying to connect the dots to the average person who's never even thought about a travel survey. That's, and OMSC is, it's a big name, but I wouldn't say it's a household name. Yeah. We're getting there. Yeah. So those, and anyone who's interested in that, I don't know, I don't recall if the memo is finalized yet and shareable, but if not, it's closed, and we can share that or apply to groups that are interested. There was also bulletin board to reach some of the more rural areas of the state. They split it coastal inland, which is funny, split the state, but yeah, some feedback from that too, mostly on the style of mailing catch dry. Jump to the next. Oh, right, and coming soon, I teased it this morning too, but I'm actually pretty excited about this. We don't know exactly what the final form will be, but this will, even for the main survey, probably even more important, but we'll test it out with the pilot. RSG is going to put together this kind of, maybe not quite real time, but close to real time dashboard so we can see from our individual perspectives how the response is coming. Well, I think that's true. We're hoping it'll give us the geographic, but I think it will. And we'll be able to just kind of see those responses coming in, and it's nice to be able to just kind of share numbers with your, home region or stakeholders, let them know what's really happening there. So as soon as that is live, we'll share it around, and I think anyone will have access to connect.
Oh, that was like if it was open like to the public, if you could share with anybody or if
yeah, I actually don't know the answer to that. Yeah. Would be sort of fascinating to be, but it could run that risk. I mean, you wouldn't want to publicize it too much because of the risk of what Ray was mentioning. You get people that want to participate that didn't get a mailer. A lot of people in the state are going to get mailers. So for the big survey, I mean, in this room, it might be 1 in 4, something like that of us will get it. Don't remember where we landed, Becky, on the ethics of could we accept the incentive or not.
Oh, we can, but at least the ODOT side, I think everyone, it was an individual, but ODOT said, people's time is valuable, it's your own personal time, and so you are allowed to accept. One of my coworkers got a survey.
All right, I think, I don't know if there's one more in my diagram, right? Yeah, passing it on now. Sorry if I went slightly over, but as you can tell, we're at an exciting moment where all this work is turning into complete surveys and eventually in the whole.
How are non-visually literate groups sort of represented? Is that through the focus group work that you try to sort of have a correction factor, or how does that engagement work?
I'd see what you mean by correction factor in terms of.
Sure. So like visually literate, I'm thinking both through like physiological reasons, but also just background reasoning. And one just have that, and so there's sort of two groups that wouldn't necessarily be reached either by postcards or by the engagement. processes?
That is a good point. So one of our focus groups was focused on people with disabilities. The visually impaired, not one that I've heard mentioned specifically on their handling. I mean, if they have accommodations already that they can use, they have a way to use their smartphones, but they do that. There is even a phone option. There is a telephone option for the survey where you're essentially communicating your travel on the other end, and they're input for that. So there would be ways to participate, but the recruitment is a good point that we caught so much, but visually impaired, that's another one. Yeah, that's
typically that was rolled in, or that aren't.
And so the decision was made not to oversample in the main survey, to not oversample from the disabled community, in part because they're part of demographic groups that have participated at relatively high rates in the past. Although a lot of that is just overlap with age, with some disabilities, right? But it tends to be more pronounced in older age groups, and they participate in surveys more, and therefore we capture it anyway. But there was some discussion of that in that focus group. Perhaps an additional incentive makes sense just because of the added burden of completing the survey. And we definitely heard that message, and it's one of those things that I think going forward will give some more thought to. Yeah, it's a good thought. I'm thinking through it now. I guess that's one case where the random digit dialing would have been an advantage.
Well, that's sometimes when we see the big data sets, folks highlight that it is folks that have technological access, and just isn't the case. But it's not so that other methodologies didn't have their own gaps.
Right? That's a great point.
Are there any last questions or items about the survey or the subcommittee activities, travel survey?
Did I miss anything? Becky, you're always good at
No, you covered a lot.
I maybe too much.
No, it's exciting. Everyone is equally excited.
Well, we're all at least users of the data, right? I was a user of the data long before I had any attachment to it. So I'm excited on that front too.
Really a lot of big important things going on with this area. So we'll move on to the update from the OMUG, the Oregon Modeling Users Group. I think Flamine was going to provide an update. I think.
Yes. So first, a quick update on the composition membership of the OMUG Coordinating Committee. Matt Dolada was originally initiated as one of the member replaced Garth Aponentes. Maybe sorry if you butchered the name there, but because Matt has left WSP, and so ideally we want the committee to be have representation from public sector, academia, and private firms. So we essentially, Garth agreed to come back to finish his essentially biannual appointment. So now we essentially back to where we were like a year ago. So we have Kyle, myself, and Garth as the OMUG Coordinate Committee. In terms of events, for the last 6 months, we had 3 events. First, in October, we had the multimodal panel. Essentially have folks come to present data and survey and modeling, truly essentially from cross cover multi-modal modes. And then in February, early February, we Alex essentially both suggested and guest moderate a session on activity sim integration with vZoom. So it's both are well attended sessions. Also, their recording are available on our website. And then we also bring back our post TRB social networking events after kind of a pause due to the COVID. So we have a hybrid event this year. So again, it's only very good to have to be able to meet a lot of folks in person. And then in terms of upcoming events, we plan to have the GAG analysis update in May, but I just learned that we will have to postpone that to maybe sometime in the summer. So we're looking to fill or schedule something else for the May time frame. So if you have any suggestions, we'll certainly welcome that suggestion for a topic. And then we currently have two summer events planned, a mobility policy session covering Metro's new mobility policy and freight study. And then we are currently planning to do a post-TRB innovation conference brown bag. So there is look like there is quite a few folks will attend the TRB Innovation in Travel Analysis and Planning Conference. If you're going here, we certainly would like to hear from you, and if you like to volunteer to brief the OMAG members on your takeaways from the conference, we certainly appreciate that, since this is, I believe, the first time the TRB combines the innovation in travel modeling and planning application conference. Only hope to hear a bit more on how it goes and what are the topics, takeaways from the conference. So let one of us or Carol know that you'd like to volunteer to either as a panelist or maybe even help us moderate the session. And then in 4, we are currently scheduled to do a session on brain probe data into travel demand models. And that is our current, we do have more, but this is what we have for the next 6 months or so. And then we're always open for suggestions for new topics or other suggestions for events. Those are the email that you can, I believe that goes to Carol, and then you can also check our website for our archived slices and recordings. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just pause again, just if there's anything you wanted to, again, if you have any topics, for example, or any questions for OMAG. Thank you again. I think we'll transition to kind of the heart of the meeting. The CFEC, the climate friendly and equitable communities requirements in the transportation planning rule. We kind of have I think a very good structure here. We'll kind of have an overview of the ODOT's implementation efforts. And kind of this was originally kind of going to have Eric Havig from ODOT, who's the planning section manager. He's my boss. But filling in for him will be Teresa and Zachary. And after that, we'll have a presentation by Cody about defining the CFAs. And then kind of a series of presentations on how, locals and NPOs are their kind of implementation efforts and how they're approaching that as well. So I actually think that was really well done and really well organized. But we'll start for kind of ODOT's implementation efforts, an overview of those, and then we'll take a break. Hopefully that sounds good. So I think I guess probably turn over to Teresa.
Sounds good. And we have the same slide deck, but we'll hopefully dig into different.
I'm not logged on to Teams. You want to share?
I can share it.
Was it the same?
No, it's
Not
the different meeting.
It's a Zoom meeting. It's a Zoom meeting. Teams, WebEx. I can't keep up.
No.
My kid can keep up.
So it's good to see you all again, most of you who did hear Zachary and I speak this morning. We do have the same slide deck. I was anticipating, we did have the same slide deck, but planned to hone in on different topic areas. Seeing that we have a lot of the same folks, more than I was anticipating, or at least the intro part, I'd like to pause a little bit more to see if questions come up, like about the multimodal inventory, DSP programming, just to, so you can get a little bit of different information in this morning. And I think Zachary will also have some different areas he'll hone in on. So again, for those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Teresa Conley, the principal planner with the Statewide Planning Unit, brought on to help implement this climate-friendly and equitable. At my side is Zachary.
Zachary Horowitz. I'm with ODOT in the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit and sort of the engineering counterpart to Teresa as far as the implementation for CFAC.
Sure, I'll introduce myself. Tara Widener from ODOT Climate Office. Climate Office is linked with the CFAC in terms of some of the first chess moves there, which is setting up your path to achieve, so like a preferred scenario, perhaps to get to your greenhouse gas target, and then some performance measures that are coming in with the CFAC rule. I don't think we're going to talk a lot today, but that is the framing that sets up the place for us to then continue down from your scenario that meets the goals into now how you take out a bite of that in your RT or your TSP.
And to illustrate how complex the work is, we could just keep going down the line.
Yeah, right.
This and stuff later. My point is that the CFAC implementation is in partnership with DLCD, and there's a subgroup of us within ODOT beyond us three that are really doing work. Go into the next slide. And so just generally, we plan to give you an overview of CFAC, and I'll talk about the different more planning-oriented components, and then Zachary will maybe keep you out a little bit less in the morning session on the technical and analysis. So quickly, again, most of you are probably familiar with the origins of the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. There was a executive order of the prior governor to require state agencies to more actively plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This grew out of it. In a nutshell, the rules really expand expectations for scenario planning, and there'll be a slide or two on that. Expand expectations for transportation system planning, and that's where a lot of mine and Zachary's work is focused on helping local jurisdictions prepare for their TSP updates. And then on the DLCD side, staff are working hard already on the parking reform and implementation of climate-friendly areas, and especially that last piece with a lot of emphasis with Zachary's work. And for in the morning session, I really went quickly past this slide. However, it shows the interplay between, in blue, the DLCD's work, and then in yellow, ODOT's work, and the sequencing of it. So the work that Cody's team is doing now in parking, and particularly the climate-friendly areas, that's really key to have done sooner, so that way it can inform the modeling efforts and the development of TSPs and the assumptions that and then, yes, and so my thought to make this different, please raise your hand. Let's keep it casual.
So yeah,
So go ahead.
I'm just kind of curious. So it makes sense if I'm understanding that right, although maybe I'm not. So it's CFA zoning. So is that different than the CFA boundary?
So there's two phases. I'll try to speak for Cody. There's the CFA studies, which is really intensely looking at okay, where are we going to establish CFAs, like and the actual designation occurs in the second phase by the end of next year.
They're roughly the same. To do zoning, you need a boundary, comp plan map.
But it comes ahead of the TSP, like figuring out the CFAs is ahead of the TSP. Is there room for amendment of them inside the TSP, or?
Well, cities can amend at any time they want. Okay. So they after the TSPs are adopted, they'll be, business as usual planning and going forward. But to get the first step going, yes. For the TSP.
And the I believe that the studies are key to have done prior to the modeling activity beginning. And then the CFAs must be designated before the TSP. So there can be a little bit of overlap in having the studies. So in the ODOT section, you'll see the lead up and then kick off of Zachary and my contracts for the planning and technical guidance first part of 23, and really earnestly completing that work in 2023. At least the critical to prepare for TSP updates. For the multimodal inventory project, there's a future slide on that. So we have the RFP posted. I hope to have a consultant, an intent to award by end of May, and hopefully kick off in July. And then really earnestly, and one of the, we want creative proposals, right? How can we at least start collecting some data to have some data ready by 2024, especially for the TSPs that are queued up earlier. So that's something we'll be looking for. And I'll pause once I get to the multimodal inventory slide. Yeah, about that. But here it just highlights the intensity of the work in 2023 and interrelatedness.
Was the GHG performance targets that Brian's leading different than we talked about, or the same as what you were talking about this morning? So beyond LOS or VMT per capita, or is that the same?
I'm smiling because I remember I talked about the volume to capacity ratio as a traditional way of performance standard, right? Performance standards are tied to performance thresholds for a specific number of values. The performance measure, and I know not you necessarily, but a lot of people, even me before I started this work, tend to lump everything together. The performance measure are those greenhouse gas goals that are applied from Division 44 that apply to the MPO areas. And in terms of having to meet a specific goal, and then to other jurisdictions, other MPOs that don't have a specific goal applied to. So greenhouse gas performance measure, and then sort of safety, reliability, VC level of traffic stress performance standards.
If I could just add, I think we've run into the same thing too, because you have a planning cycle. So if you stretch it out, you have a long range plan, you come in, you get the funding, you do some things, you get done, you have like a development review, right? Are they the same thing? Are you using the same measure to look at a long range plan and say, hey, here's where things are falling short, and then you get into the DEVRA and you say, it's beating some threshold. I think there's some idea that they might be the same metrics, but used in slightly different ways.
These are being developed.
And those are all kind of in the long range plan down to the project. And then that's separate from what is in the scenario planning, which is like Metro's got climate smart, and there's certain things they have to do there. And Salem and the
Will be something quantifiable that can come out GSP. Whatever, GHG per VMT per person per year, or whatever the measure might be, right?
Right. That will be an output of modeling workforce. Household-based VMT per capita. Yeah. But that's just the performance measure that's assigned to that particular planning exercise. There's still performance measures that would say at a TSP level, looking out at a 20-year horizon in the future year, that yes, greenhouse gas for sure. I mean, the VMT per capita rather, but there's still the evaluation of the transportation component in the TSP. Is this intersection meeting some goals? The prior goal was VT or auto oriented. The new goals can be that, but also are required to include something else. Is it improving safety? Is it improving ethical accessibility?
Well, and the performance measures are, to get to what Tara, you were talking about earlier today, it's just operational, it isn't construction based. The performance measures are only as people use it, not as there's not going to be a performance measure as built or how it's built.
That's a good question. I don't think so. I would say that there could potentially be something that would be tied to some sort of green construction. I mean, that's not an uncommon, maybe it's less common, but it's not unknown, like the sort of the green road program and things like that for construction. But I think that's probably maybe a little bit outside the planning realm. That might tie into a little bit more of the evaluation of like this project, where you could build it in a certain way that might reduce, waste or diesel emissions like that. Renewable surface, exactly.
And I think these they're building a toolkit of which the TSPs are choosing something else to do otherwise. So if you could choose to, or a city could choose to move that into that later stage if they wanted to choose such.
So the cities will be able to choose from a toolkit and not be mandated to use particular ones for all.
Yeah.
Pick a couple of this one, pick a couple of this one, something like that, as opposed to like the feds say, you're going to do these performance measures. You don't have a choice.
Once you're in this sort of TSP realm, then there's the scenario planning realm before that, where we're being a little bit tighter with those. I think.
Right. That's also a good point.
Yeah, so
Well, I guess there's a couple things. One, generally the language about performance measures or performance standards comes directly from the transportation planning from Division 4, right? Those are defined in there or used in different sections. The other part I want to mention, we hadn't talked about this yet, is that on the defect webpage, there's a FAQ document where we've had this question come up several times before, and we actually created an FAQ to sort of define out what is the performance standard, how does it apply to the threshold, what is the performance measure, and how does that tie to the performance, the target, thank you.
where's what?
Obviously, thank you if everyone's asking, right?
No, but it is a good question, and it is confusing.
Performance standards, DPR, is like plan amendment, transportation impacts, so kind of stuff. That stuff's already been there. Measures, monitoring, so performance-based planning, how are you doing over time? It's not like a day-to-day decision. You can use them. They're using rules for like making decisions, but it's more we're reporting on a set of performance measures, and they are prescribed, and the 900 set of goals are. That's the work that Brian Hurley did.
I'm gonna jump back in and realize the time is going quickly.
It sure is.
So most of you heard my spiel about the transportation planning guides update. So I'm leading off a project. Kittleson is the lead consultant on that. To update the web-based transportation CSP guidelines document, and the more internally focused DevRev or development review guidelines. This project will really tag teaming with Zachary and Sarah's team on key items, exactly like what we're talking about. So we'll be leading on him, and then also OHP work for the performance measure discussion, for example, and then how do you utilize the model. Yes, keep on going, and then raise your hand if you have a question, like on this slide, for example. The CFAC rulemaking really expanded the expectations for transportation inventory, especially for walking and biking infrastructure, and for transit, transit and vehicle travel as well. And so the intent of this project is to produce a locally owned data set that's consistent, hopefully across the state or where the UGBs within MPOs. So gathering what data exists currently at the local level or the ODOT level, compile it, see where the gaps are, and then fill those gaps. And then talk about, okay, how do we maintain this over the long term? And then establish that long-term solution. And are there any questions on this one in particular? Or we can also talk offline.
I think just from earlier, just to note that, it'll be interesting what the team comes up with from like a data spec, and just, thinking about it's how easy it is to propagate back to like OSM. I think, it's, I don't know what other people think. That's
Already more than OSM. As, you know, it already has most of this data in there for freebie.
Right.
So, and I know Salem's got out LiDAR, all their streets should get this information because the state is requiring.
Right, maybe they port it back up to, I mean, there could be our old copy, but maybe they put it in OSM, and it's like,
Is there a vendor that you're using to move between LiDAR and different mode features on the network?
Yeah, so it was part of they drove it and the vendor was able to provide them sidewalks and bike lanes for some reason. I think they're gonna have.
Which vendor offhand?
Chris, I was just curious, like what level of street classification were you guys talking about getting down to?
It was required in the rules, and I think that's extremely broad. You know, public right away, we're gonna draw the line there. But, you know, there's expectations in the rules for walkways, right? Extremely general. And so.
Right, I was thinking like the assumption that like an LOS on a neighborhood street, you could maybe assume it's already low LOS or something.
To that point, one thing this contract does cover, and I don't think it's on a bullet point on the slide, but digging into the level of traffic stress, so not LOS per se, but we're walking and biking. We have the methodology defined in the APM, but the multimodal inventory contract will take a second look at that based on the data that we're collecting under CPAC and then coordinate with Zachary's project. See if those methodologies could be updated at all.
And, you know, something to go along with this is that we're going to have a tremendous amount of data after the multiple city. We still may not have a lot of tools in terms of being able to translate that into actionable decisions. So that's something that we'll have to sort of work on, because whether those tools are looking to close gaps or determine, let's say, BMT reductions based on the introduction of new facilities, you know, sidewalk networks or protected bike lanes. I mean, those are, cities that are putting those elements in the transportation system plans are rightly going to want credit for those type of investments, certainly vis-a-vis roadway improvement or capacity adding projects. And what is the best way to do that? That's sort of an ongoing challenge that we're going to try and solve over the next year.
And two other kind of quick points. One, I think the appetite, and everybody thinks this is going to be the holy grail, and it's going to be, we don't have enough money to do all that, so it's going to have to be put back. But two, I would say definitely more than the highway system, right, or the arterial, the state-owned system, right? They are definitely going below there. So I think kind of 2 points.
Yeah, sorry, I was spoken at the LTS.
And at the climate office, and there's also scenario planning work. Is there anything you or just like to add to?
Yeah, I often try to simplify this. This is sort of what each agency is doing, but basically everybody's getting a path. How do we get to the greenhouse gas goals that have already been out there for quite some time? So is that one that your own agency is pushing forward, and we're making sure that the top 3 largest metropolitan areas do have their own preferred scenario to meet that? And then everybody is going to get performance measures. So you'll basically translate that into performance measures for your area. And if you're one of the smaller 5, you're by default kind of going to get the state's SPS vision to set as your performance measures. So coming out of this, you'll have this path and some performance measures to report on in the 8 metropolitan areas for the city. And the consultant is being hired, and they will help you through getting to that point and your first reporting cycle.
Before I hand it off to Zachary, for the short amount of remaining time for the technical pieces, one other component that I am standing up is the TSP funding program described on the next slide. And we're programming in jurisdictions as we speak for funding based on a variety of factors, local capacity and your own TSP timing. I'll just kind of say that and then move on to exactly the remaining time.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll try not to be too repetitious from this morning, but I do know we have some new folks. Again, important to illustrate. Oh wait, did I want to start with the how many transportation modelers does it take to screw in a light bulb? We have Chat GPT. Do we have an answer? What was the answer? Complicated.
One, to create a model to determine the optimal time and route to buy the light bulb, and another to simulate the impact of the new light bulb on transportation mode choice, traffic patterns, and it should say GHG emissions as well.
Right. Anyway, I thought
All the
Chat
jobs are
GPT did a
great
good
jobs.
job of pulling their knowledge of the 4 steps in there. You know, when next time we'll have to ask you how to make a joke that's actually funny. I think you're still a little way from AI taking the mover.
If you're transportation planners, you don't have a sense of humor.
Right. Well, that was something we had from the point. Thankfully, we have our AIs to report. I also will say, just as a general, you know, we're hearing good questions. There's obviously a lot of work here. It may sort of seem like we're building the ship as we're sailing it, and I will say, if that's your impression, you're definitely correct. Because while there's a lot of smart people working on this, we have great consultants on the various teams. We have great folks internally. Obviously, being able to rely on the APNVG and the OMSC are fabulous. But this stuff is new, and if you look at other states that have done this type of work, whether it's California with their SB 843, that was 10 years ago. They're still spending time working some of this out, and there are a lot of challenges. Now, again, it's not the same sort of legal planning framework, but still, they're doing, you know, we have a year plus to do the work that they've still not quite accomplished in 10 years. Colorado, different, but we're breaking new ground here, and it's exciting, but certainly a challenge. Again, DLCD's rule, ODOT's implementing, DLC's also doing their implementation work. CFAs, again, Cody will have a whole spiel about that after our break, and then the parking is a big component too, as a way of sort of managing cars. We have ODOT impact area mapping tool. There's the link. The presentation will be shared, so everybody will be able to take a look at that. Next slide, too, Carol. For our guide, modeling analysis guide update, I'm the agency project manager. Garth Apanatis is our consultant project manager. We also have a really strong team along with DKS, RSG, Kittleton, site communication. There are many things we want to do, but we only have so much time, so much budget, and so much staff resources. You see those 4 key project outcomes: implementing the climate-friendly areas from a procedural point of view, defining household-based VMT to align with Division 44. The performance measures that Ray is asking about, and then finally updating all the draft guidance into our various manuals and sort of solidifying it. And again, this is really just the first step we hope to accomplish these kind of things to make sure we're meeting the requirements of the rules, but there'll be more work after this, probably for several years. At the scope of work, just trying to imagine the highest level, we're going to look at all these different documents, transportation planning rule, and really identify what needs to be what needs to be updated, what needs to be developed. Those are the manuals and our guides that we're looking at. And then we're really going to lean on both TPAL staff for the models that we manage, as well as our friends at the MPOs around the state to get in-depth knowledge of their MPOs, travel demand models, so we can make sure that the inputs that are going to go in are going to make good outputs coming out. The CFA implementation, again, I'll really reserve a lot of that for Cody's and DLCD's work, but the goal here is that we really want to make sure we have a consistent and scientific process. Oh, sorry. Maybe one more slide. There we go. My mouth is running faster than my slides, which is not the first time that's happened. Anyway, with the climate-friendly areas, again, the key thing here is to have a repeatable scientific process that really can stand a high level of scrutiny, because we want to make sure we're getting a good result. And a lot of that comes down to the type of data we're going to we're going to want to make sure that are correct in the model, certainly as we apply to the climate-friendly area. Again, the output is going to be primarily the performance measure of household-based VMT per capita. That's what our TSPs are going to be judged on primarily. And then we're also going to develop guidance for the range of transportation models, which include trip-based and the newer activity-based models. Next slide, please. In addition to the sort of old-fashioned version of performance standards, we're going to work, consultants going to help us develop a really wide toolbox of options. These will be, again, to meet the requirement of the rule to go beyond just auto-based performance for our transportation system plan. Pedestrian and bicycle levels of traffic stress is one of those. And you see below the 8 objectives from OAR 66012-215. So we're going to try and come up, again, they're not going to be prescribed. They can be applied to many different levels. One of the interesting challenges here is aligning these performance standards with the upcoming update to the Oregon Highway Plan, because that will apply to state facilities. And we're going to make sure that the current OHP is really auto-based, make sure that the performance standards that are developed from here can also align with that. And then a further goal would be to make sure they align and roll down to individual counties and cities development codes, which becomes a little bit of a challenge to make sure they're all aligned. Still my favorite slide, again, household-based BMT per capita. This is the key performance metric, so I do want to sort of highlight it again. It really makes the connection to a very simple formula, which everybody, certainly at this type of group, can appreciate. It ties in a lot of the climate work from Division 44 to Division 12 by saying that if our goal is emissions per person that we want to lower, we're going to say that state policy for things like electric vehicles or fuel economy is going to hold that emission per mile relatively constant, sort of consistent or consistent improvement rather, we hope. And then the idea is that in the green area is the target that we're aiming for. And these are effectively BMT per capita. If you see on the right-hand side of the equation, the miles will cancel when we get emissions per person. So it's a very simple formula, a lot simpler than Euler's equation. Okay. Again, at the end of the day, next, oh, you got it. We're going to update our documents. That's what this slide is about. Next slide. And before I talk a little bit about specifically our OMSC role, and again, this is, or maybe it's turning out to be, everybody on this call is going to have some role one way or the other. We really have 3 different groups. We have a technical advisory committee. Technical is maybe not exactly the right word, though. There are plenty of technical folks. They were there to help make sure our project is meeting all of our deliverables, our guidelines for review. But we have 2 highly technical groups. One, which is the analysis procedure manual user group, and then we're going to have a working group from the OMSC, mostly from the MPC. And the goal here is to really get super deep into the weeds on individual models, on individual processes, to make sure that the members of OMSC can feel very comfortable that they've had an extremely strong role and opportunity to sort of help develop this guidance, because this is not a top-down point of view, and I don't want to minimize the work that consultants are doing because they're doing the heavy lifting. But this is a collaborative effort between the consultant team, ODOT and DLCD at the agency level, and then the individual technical experts from the OMSC in order to do all this type of work over the next year plus. And I just had a couple last slides for the morning just to talk about some of the things that we've been wrestling with. Again, news to me as of like a week ago, the difference between household-based or home-based BMT per capita. We're going to, well, I think the goal is to use household-based because that aligns best with the work from Division 12 and the scenario planning. But again, these are some of the questions we have, because clearly to develop home-based BMT in terms of a model output, my understanding is that that's a lot simpler. Also, the idea of how to determine per capita for a future population, so we don't really know if the people are going to show up or not. So those are sort of interesting things that we'll have to sort of figure out, and again, do it in a way that everybody can support it.
Too fast.
Well, this is the contact information. I think everybody will have the slide there. Maybe just the last slide, I suppose. Maybe back. Oh, a different presentation. Well, never mind about this last time. But it will say, just as a way of sort of, as I've grown my knowledge for the work that OMSC has done, and spent actually a lot of time with Tara talking about the prior work in the greenhouse gas subcommittee, we also realized, I'm going to bring Alex in here too, because he told me a lot about this, that there's a lot of recommendations that came out from that report that take time and resources to implement, and they haven't got a chance to do that yet. There is a real good opportunity with this current modeling and analysis guidance to bring in some of those prior recommendations to, let's say, provide some level of income consistency across the model in terms of how the models work with this kind of thing, or pricing policies, for example. We're going to try and do that. It seems to be, at least from some initial conversations I had, a good opportunity to get to sort of help align the baselines across all the different models in the state, depending which kinds they are. But we're making sure that we're going to have, again, that sort of consistency across the processes, and that the numbers will be comparable between different locations. Anyway, I know that's a lot of information. I will say, with all the work that's being done, we're constantly making lists of opportunities for coordination between all the different groups, and the lists are getting quite long. So there's definitely a lot of internal and external coordination. But happy to take any questions, especially from the folks online that may be seeing some of this information for the first time.
So, Mr. Chairman, we're about 10 minutes behind the schedule. Break.
Yeah, very good recommendation. So we will take a 10-minute break. Also, we have some time with roundtable discussion later too. We can also take some of these questions, discuss them as well. So yeah, I will say let's take a 10-minute break, a sharp 10-minute break. So please be back at 2:50. Not fair because she worked there. So.
Yeah, well.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cody Meyer, Education Center with LPD, and that is overview of climate-sensitive areas in the CFAC rules. So if you breeze through these first couple slides, just remember we're in the metropolitan areas where all the action is, all the emissions are mostly from the state. So we've got greenhouse gas targets here, and EPR has had special rules for planning areas for decades. Next, just you know the outcomes we're shooting for here. So climate equity, increased housing, increased jobs, vibrant downtown, yada yada. And the timeline they went through, this is the large bucket timeline, and as Zachary showed, we're leading with the land use actions and some of the scenario work, and then heading into the nitty gritty of all the TSP updates for the rest of the decade. So good job security. The context for all this reminder is that since was it like 2013, we've had the statewide transportation strategy. We're doing so great on implementing towards the vision. So we, four agencies have been working together, created this Every Mile Counts program. It's a 2-year work plan that rolls over every 2 years. There, it's really collaborative effort. So CFAC is a collaboration mostly with ODOT and PLC. I really struggled to find like a document picture that like captures like a logo. So the next slide is just kind of broadly like why a climate friendly area. Again, back to the statewide transportation strategy. We have goals for land use in the statewide transportation strategy. One is that we keep doing UGVs the way we do them, and our monitoring found that like it's pretty good on keeping up with population growth in urban areas. The other was that about 30% of Oregon's households in the future need to live in like walkable mixed use neighborhoods. And that really is a key enabling strategy for like micromobility and car sharing and transit and the mode shift that we need to see, which are also strategies for the SDNs. So that's why we're doing this. We also know just at DLCD, we've had, policy on increasing housing and transportation choice over time. We're in the middle, not only a climate crisis, but a housing crisis. So this kind of gets both of those, trying to get more housing options in the areas of the state where obviously, if you saw back on the slide, there's a jobs housing imbalance. There's more jobs than housing. And from what I've seen in a lot of the RTPs around there, is like we're checking that to kind of grow worse over time. Next slide. So what is a climate friendly area? If you're here in person, you would have lunch at one. They're not revolutionary. These are downtown centers, mixed use corridors, walkable pedestrian scale. So a lot of the stuff was developed because the car became the primary mode of choice. They're planned for high quality pedestrian bike transit service and parking advantage because it's compact land use type. So next slide. Where are they required? So again, we're just in the metropolitan planning areas. We're looking at cities or urbanized county areas, so counties that provide urban services to a population of 5,000 or more. And then Marion County, which does provide urban services out on Salem, Lancaster area. In Metro, again, not revolutionary here. Metro's been doing this since the 90s, Region 2040. So the rules say, hey, if you're a metro city, use your Region 2040 center. That's not a CFA, but a lot of the different requirements that would kind of come into play when a CFA is in place are then kind of transitioned over to the Region 2040 centers. Next slide, please. So the requirements on the left, first of all, when they're doing the studies, I'll show you the phases in a slide or two, but there's requirements for like, where do you cite a CFA? And so we knew like people are already doing this planning, not revolutionary, these aren't new. This is setting some minimum standards. So the rules say for cities when they're doing the studies, like look where you're already planning for this kind of stuff, where you have, downtown zoning, you have mixed use, TUD style zone, start there. Look for areas that would be served with transit, planning for these things, probably planning for high quality bike and transit. Not an in-depth analysis, but just make sure like, hey, you check with Public Works to make sure that like where you're doing candidate areas that your Public Works department says like, yeah, that's not crazy. We do have kind of some capacity, or we're anticipating capacity based on what we were already planning, seeing developed there. There's some exceptions for hazard areas. So we obviously don't want to put a bunch of development in the floodplain, that kind of stuff. And then there's some requirements for minimum dimensions. So 750 feet, which generated a lot of discussion recently of how do you measure that? But we're looking for roughly right here, like one, if it's a cherry in the stem, it's okay if just the cherry meets it and the stem doesn't, but please don't send in something that's just the stem. It's not 750. So we're kind of looking for some basic minimum standards here. And this is just to make sure they have some dense and scale and kind of some centeredness. So in the zoning code, when the cities adopt their zoning reforms, really looking to make sure that within the CFA, you're allowing for a broad variety of housing types, for commercial services, you're allowed. In doing the calculation for the sizing, we're allowing cities to say, hey, I have this like mixed use zone that qualifies, but I also have an abutting high density area. Can we add that in without changing that to mixed zoning too? So they're giving some credit for like abutting high density residential areas or employment areas. Looking just to make sure that like we're prioritizing the implementation of public services, parks and open space should be prioritized in or near CFAs. Want them to be attractive places to live. There's some requirements for minimum block length standards and how to measure that. And then just importantly, there's no cap on density with development. And any questions I can take at any time there. So the next slide is the two options for how you do
the calculations to get to your requirement. And you'll see on the left in the gray is there's different steps here. So there's different city sizes. If you're a city between 5 and 10,000, it's pretty easy. You just designate 25 acres. Finding in the city of Philomath was one that we're looking at maps of recently where the 25 acres might seem like a lot for a city of 5,000, but when you start overlaying that on their existing downtown zoning, it's like, hey, even be a little bit bigger than 25. That's pretty good. So early results are there's a lot of kind of marginal changes to the existing zones, which is great. Say, hey, there's already a zone there, and we're just kind of changing the standards a little bit within that zone. So getting rid of the parking minimum requirement, getting rid of the max, on density or something like that. Once you get above 10,000, it just kind of scales up from there. So it's really using like a housing capacity analysis or housing needs analysis to set your denominator, and then going for 30% of existing and projected housing. So what's here now, and then what you're projected developing into over your planning plan. So the option A is, we heard this during the rulemaking, was like, we want flexibility, but then you say, okay, there's flexibility, and people say like, well, what does that exactly mean? How do I do it? So there's two options. One is like very prescriptive, and this is like, these are the things that will be the standards in your zoning code to get over that hurdle. And it's really set on minimum density requirements, and then the building heights, the allowed building heights. So it's not like you have to have an 8-foot building. Less than that. Then the outcomes-oriented standards approach is really just using target levels of development and saying, people your study, come in and show how you're achieving that. How does your zoning code get to that level? So next slide is the phasing. So right now we're in phase 1, and that is study. It's due at the end of this year, and there's no flexibility in the date of turning that in. We've got contracts ongoing right now. It really starts with community engagement and community engagement plans, equity engagement, populations. Then identifying the CFAs, like where they might be, looking at what are the development standards there in place today, and then kind of what would the gap be between where you need to go with the development standards and what's there today. And then looking for the potential of displacement of underserved populations. So doing an overlay with your potential CFAs with the anti-displacement toolkit that was developed at DLCD a couple years ago. Say, hey, if there's a risk here, then what are the mitigation measures you could adopt to mitigate that risk? They look up table of things based on what kind of flags get raised. Look up, okay, that's this type of risk, and here's like a housing production strategy you could employ to mitigate that risk. So that work's ongoing. Our contracts end at the biennium in June. But we gave folks the end of the year to kind of keep thinking on that, turn those in. And then in phase 2, it'll actually be adopting the zoning changes. So that is due in December of 2024, unless cities said, hey, I want more time. A couple cities did apply for an extension on time for that, and we're granted that. So, but for the most part, it looks like people are coming in at 2024. Yeah, so they in phase 2 obviously have to do the zoning code adoption, obviously more public engagement to make sure that this is like for real now and we're still engaging folks. Looking at housing production strategies, if there was a need to mitigate displacement, the production strategies have to be employed at that time as well. Then there's some transportation stuff that happens. So the one big one that doesn't happen is the DPR 0060, which would apply at the time of the zone change traditionally. But the rule 0325 says if you are designating a CFA or you're making a plan amendment in a CFA or town center, subsequent to adoption, you do not have to do 0060, use this alternative approach instead, which is a much lighter lift. And so what that really does, those last two bullet points on the right there, is that say, look for any impacts to the state highway system. That tool that Zach had a link to up there to say, hey, here's where those would be. So you can overlay that with your CFA. And then also just looking at multimodal gap analysis. So really working with that multimodal inventory, but really find what is the CFA. Say, hey, to get people to reduce the amount of driving, land uses, but we also need those kind of enabling transportation choices to be in place as well. So we want to make sure that we're really focusing in on what are the projects that need to happen to make that successful. Next slide. Okay, so to date, we've got these available on the DLC website. There's a couple more just kind of like overview documents, but it's really just like there's stock slides, there's overview documents. We've got this methods guide that we hired LCOG to help us put together, which is a real nice document for practitioners. We've been having peer exchange meetings with the land use planners in these cities about once a month. We really just kind of talk turkey on zoning map. You guys might be interested in that. It's like your counterparts. Super complicated stuff, but they're really digging into it. And the document really provides a how-to manual on how to come up with that capacity calculation. Also got, as I said, we put together the displacement toolkit and made a map and a tool to provide to the cities so they can just do a simple GIS overlay. And then we have direct assistance where we're going to planning commission meetings, we're having one-on-one phone calls, there's all kinds of direct staffing assistance. And then DLCs, as I said, we have contracts to help these studies get done. So one is with community engagement firms. So they're doing the overall plan and then operationalizing that engagement, or just assisting the cities. In a lot of ways, the cities are saying, like, we want to be the ones forming relationships. And so can you just help us get to that point, which is really great to see capacity building there. And then we've got IGAs with council governments or a couple grants with cities to provide their own technical analysis. So Tim here is doing a lot of work with the city of Salem, and Kaiser, and Marion County, kind of doing that zoning map. That's going pretty well. So far, we're really happy with what we're seeing, and really happy with the partnership with the comments that we've had. I think that one more slide here. Yeah, just benefits and concerns at that level. Obviously, we want to provide more opportunities for jobs and housing in metropolitan areas. We think that the CFA zoning provides more flexibility. There's a lot of things that can fit in there. Methodology, as I said, there's like two options. So it really can meet cities where they're at in their zoning codes. I'll say so far, the early results I'm seeing is a lot of the existing zones meet the standards. They just need some kind of text, which is really nice to see. It's much lower level lift and less of like drastic change that we're going to see. It's really just kind of setting a minimum standard and getting that done. One of the really big ones we've heard is the alternative transportation review process. So say, like, if anyone's gone through an 0060 analysis, that can be pretty burdensome. That's shut down a lot of good development for housing in the state in the past. So we're hearing a lot of encouraging results so far of folks saying, like, oh, we don't have to do that. We're going to do enough zoning, and it doesn't require that much analysis. Obviously, there's concerns on displacement. I think one of the key things that I've heard from people that are far smarter on this stuff than I am is that, like, the first thing to know about displacement is that it's already occurring. Like, gentrification is already occurring. It's not because you're doing this. It's just the phenomenon that you're in the middle of. So to acknowledge that, but we're all concerned about it. So we're employing this toolkit and want to probably do some updates to that as well for the future. And yeah, just to actually make those housing production strategies able to mitigate risk. There's a lot of housing and housing production right now, but it just, it won't be free. So, yeah, that's my presentation. Have any questions? I can reflect these two.
Yeah, any questions for Cody to reflect, I guess? Any questions? Also from the folks online?
The chat, it's that one little red thing.
That was just SGS.
Probably the commission's website.
Sounds good. So yeah, we'll keep going through the agenda, and we kind of start the round table where we see how Metro and LCOG and other folks are approaching this, kind of their efforts and their activities.
Mr. Chairman, I think Kim is online, been communicating with Paul Thompson and have some connections with him, so I don't know if we'll have Paul.
Okay.
We start with Kim.
Yeah, this is Kim. I'm here, so I just wanted to share a few slides, just to share some of the work that Metro is doing. This is a good time for that.
Yes, please do. Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
Okay, great. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and learn, even more about all the work everybody's doing sort of at the state level and also all the modeling work. And so I'm Kim Ellis. I'm transportation planner at Metro, and I was the project manager that led development of our climate smart strategy that was adopted back in 2014, which was really the first sort of scenario plan developed in response to all of the state rulemaking. And then another role that I play is I'm the project manager for our regional transportation plan updates, and that is a key vehicle for implementing the climate smart strategy and work that we're doing right now to update our regional transportation plan. Will be addressing the new CFAC rules to the extent that the regional transportation plan is required to. So I just wanted to sort of just acknowledge, and it's come up in some of the earlier conversations already today, but our region has had a long history of doing work to respond to original legislation back in 2007, 2009, to begin developing our strategy and also to implement it in support of the work that the CFAC rules are now continuing to carry forward. And our 2018 Regional Transportation Plan was the first RTP that fully incorporated our climate smart strategy. And so our process now is that each time we're updating the regional transportation plan, we're reporting back on how we're doing implementing that strategy. And the new CFREC rules are going to add additional things for us to do as part of that process, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Our foundation, as we've developed Climate Smart, it just really reaffirmed the importance of our 2040 growth concept as our land use and transportation strategy for at the local and regional level for meeting the state targets. And so the work that we're doing to, and Cody sort of referenced this in his presentation, we won't be designating CFAs per se or climate friendly areas. We're really relying on the centers, the purple areas, purple and pink areas on this map to serve as those. And largely those have already been adopted locally through local comprehensive plans, but we do have some work to do for a handful of centers that have not yet adopted formal boundaries, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And we've always viewed this work, even though when 2040 was adopted back in 1995, climate was not the driving force behind it. It was about compact urban form and trying to reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita. Even at that time, that's when the transportation planning rule was also being developed originally. And so really trying to have a land use and transportation vision that was integrated locally and regionally to achieve those broader outcomes. So for Metro, our requirements really stem in three main areas that we're going to be focusing on over the next 2 years to meet what the sections that apply directly to Metro or the regional transportation plan. A first piece of that is our update to the regional transportation plan that's been underway since 2021. We're aiming to have that work completed by basically the end of November of this year. And I can share a little bit more about that because there's some key pieces of that work that are going to directly support sort of regional and local implementation of the CFEC rules on the transportation planning side. In addition, the CFEC rules required us to amend our urban growth management functional plan, and that's our way of directing how cities and counties in our region implement regional policies for land use and transportation. And that is the requirement that we require the cities and counties in our region to adopt boundaries where they don't currently have them adopted locally for those regional and town centers that I described on the map. And it's really a handful of smaller centers, town centers, that are remaining, and most all of them actually have mixed use zoning in place already. So we don't think that it's going to be a big lift for our local partners to do that work, and they'll be required to have that work completed. Metro will adopt the amendments directing them to do that work, and then the cities and counties will need to complete those updates by the end of 2025. The third area that is going to be a key part of our implementation work is updating and amending the transportation functional plan that similar to the urban growth management functional plan, which is focused on land use. Our transportation functional plan directs how cities and counties implement the regional transportation plan. And so that has not been updated for quite some time. 2012 was the last time. And so we have a lot of housekeeping updates to do to that functional plan, but also new things to do both to address more fully the climate smart strategy, this 2023 regional transportation plan that we're in the process of updating, and then some of the other aspects of the climate friendly rules to just align what we currently have as requirements with the new state rules. In particular, we have parking requirements that have been on the books since the mid-90s, and those really are outdated already. And then with the new parking reform that was adopted as part of the CFEC rules, we'll need to make sure that we're in sync with that. This graphic here just shows some of the relative timelines. So our regional transportation plan is updated every 5 years under federal law, and under Oregon law, it also serves as a regional transportation system plan. And so that is why the RTP does have to meet certain of the requirements within the CFEC rules. And as part of the update that we're doing a pretty significant update to our high capacity transit strategy. That's going to be looking at new bus rapid transit corridors and some of our frequent bus corridors. So we've had frequent transit, which is 15-minute or better service in our region on most all our arterials planned for the future. We also have our Max Light Rail system and a commuter rail connection between Beaverton in Wilsonville, but this high capacity transit strategy update is really looking at opportunities to have bus rapid transit more broadly across the region. Also earlier mentioned was the work that we've been doing with ODOT. It's been a joint project with ODOT to update the mobility policy for our region. And we've been doing that work since 2019. And we do still have some work to do. This policy update for mobility is really going to be our way of addressing the rules to go beyond just looking at motor vehicle travel or as part of our performance measures. We are moving away or have moved away from the volume to capacity ratio, and in its place we'll be looking at the VMT per capita measure as a measure of mobility, travel speed on the thruway system as a measure of reliability of the thruway system, and then also a system completeness measure, which also really directly ties into some of the multimodal inventory work that you all were talking about earlier. And so the combination of those three measures are going to be our primary measures for mobility, not the volume to capacity ratio. It doesn't mean that the VC ratio can, it can still be used, but it's just not going to be a basis for our regional system planning on the arterials or the thruway system, if adopted at the end of the year. And that we will be looking to integrate it at the system plan level, the plan amendment level in our region, and any corridor planning work, concept plans, other area plans as well. And then as is required under Division 44 and to some extent in the TBR amendments for each update of our long-range transportation plan, we also report back to DLCD on how we're doing implementing the climate smart strategy. For this update, we are in the process of doing some analysis. We've been working very closely with the ODOT Climate Office and Cody at DLCD, as well as DEQ staff. We have RSG and DKS on contract to help us in doing an analysis using the Vision Eval tool that ODOT had developed, and that has been the basis for the targets. So we're using that for this RTP to report back on how we're doing relative to those state targets, and really working through presenting some options. This RTP is going to be the first plan that we have significant congestion pricing and tolling as part of our analysis that wasn't included in our climate smart strategy back in 2014. We've also had changes in transit and in terms of service. There were service cuts because of the pandemic, then there were driver shortages. So we've had, as a region, have had, I would say, had a step back in terms of our aggressiveness in expanding transit, which was a centerstone of the climate smart strategy. So we're working to identify whether or not we're on track to meet the target, bringing in some new concepts, the tolling as a piece of that, and then also sorting out what of the statewide transportation strategy beyond what's required in the rules for us to include that we would include as part of our updated strategy. So you see that in the green, and we update and monitor and report back in addition to the more frequent progress reports that are in the rule now, but we'll also do it as part of each regional transportation plan update. The functional plan work that I mentioned, we will begin updating the transportation functional plan early next year. Also, the urban growth management functional plan will begin to be updated early next year to address those two provisions that I previously mentioned. The urban growth management work that Metro is responsible for, which is basically managing our urban growth boundary. We have processes to do that every 6 years. So that's what you see, that sort of cycle of that in that more teal color. The last thing, couple things I wanted to highlight, just in terms of the work that we're doing. I mentioned the Vision Eval work, so that is well underway, and I think it would be useful to share some of that with this group at the right time. There's also a desire on our part and a potential opportunity to have a greenhouse gas emissions inventory for our region that's sector-based. DEQ does that statewide every year for each sector, and there is a desire to have something like that for our region. And there is an opportunity to help fund some of that work with a new Environmental Protection Agency grant program that is being launched, that we're going to be doing some planning work. Metro is going to be the lead agency for our whole metropolitan statistical area, but it won't just be with land use and transportation, but the EPA grant is intended to cover all sectors. And then I also wanted to note that on the multimodal inventories, the conversations you were having earlier about that, Metro's regional land information system, has that, Metro has had a long history of maintaining regional data sets, and including, we do have bike and pedestrian inventory. And so we'll want to be part of that statewide work that ODOT is going to be leading. The CFAC rules are calling for more detail than what our current inventories require, or that Metro currently collects through our systems. And there's other Metro staff here that probably can speak to that a little bit more. But that's an opportunity for collaboration and a lot of interest, because we want to be able to help support our local partners in this work. And there's a real value to having that data at the regional level, not just for the local governments, but also, for the consultants doing work for them, or other studies that are happening. And then the local plan updates that are shown in the slide really just mirror what Teresa has been presenting and sharing as they've been setting up that CFAC local TSP implementation program that they've been working with local governments in our region to identify a phasing schedule to help support them as they're working through. But the tools we're developing, the information and data we're developing for the regional transportation plan will also need to support that work. So I'm going to just sort of stop there. And there are other slides that talk more about the RTP update, and I'd be happy to give an update on some of that work at another time, but just given time, those are the key things I wanted to share.
Yes, thank you, Kim. Yeah, if anyone does have any questions or want to discuss this, instead of kind of having this roundtable time at the end, I think it might make sense also have some time here. Ooh, we have Alex.
Yeah, sure. This could be a later question, Kim. I was just curious. I thought I heard you mention pricing policy in the RTP. I was curious if that's outside of kind of what's on ODOT's infrastructure, or is that above and beyond what ODOT's talking about?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Alex. So right now, that's a question that we have. So what we are have been developing in Vision Eval is to basically, to the best that we can, have assumptions in the Vision Eval tool that mirror the tolling work that ODOT's doing. In addition to that, what we've been having discussions about at the staff level is what of the STS pricing assumptions should we be including or not including, because they do go beyond sort of policies that are in place or things that have been contemplated, and aren't fully implemented, at the state level, like, the carbon pricing, the RUC fee, the VMT fee, because those are not things that we have, that are, they're being implemented to some extent, but they're not fully implemented in the way that the STS has envisioned them. But at a minimum, we will be reflecting the ODOT tolling projects, pricing projects, and then some parking pricing that we already include in our regional travel model that is reflective of what has been adopted locally to date in policy.
Thank you.
I do see Paul Thompson online. Paul, can you hear us, and are you able to? Yay!
I can for now hear you.
Yeah, Paul, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to say that, like, Kim, I really liked your comments about some of the lessons that you've learned and that we should bring them back. I mean, maybe this OMUG thing is in place for some of that too, right? We were trying to figure out if it's a PhD conversation. So Kim may have stuff right now. So Kim, we should continue to talk about what you might bring to share. I think you mentioned vision eval work, some stuff about an inventory. And then there's a discussion about maybe the multimodal data inventory. So anyway.
Yeah, that, and then I think the other area that is on the mobility policy itself, because of the VMT per capita, there's technical work that we need to do to be able to estimate not just at a regional level, but at smaller geographies for system planning or the plan amendments that policy would apply to. And then the throughway measure, and that links to, I think, some of the updates that the highway plan ODOT will be doing to help support CFAC as well.
Right, and some of those things stretch over multiple times, so you might be able to grab some OMUG, right? The user group has these webinars and do some sharing really quickly here within a month. There's a slot open. We'll be in touch.
That's great, thanks.
I'm sorry, Paul. Yeah, Paul, please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Thompson. I'm the manager for the transportation and planning programs at the Lane Council of Governments. Two quick caveats first. Number one, I've had a really unstable internet connection. I've rejoined this meeting 3 times. Hopefully I'll stay connected this time. And number two, Kelly Clark from LCOG was scheduled to do this presentation and she went on a last-minute vacation this week. So I am filling in. I'm not the person doing the work, so please don't ask me tough questions. However, what I do want to run down is really the 3 areas that LCOG has been and will be involved in the CFEC implementation work since the rules were implemented. We started off right away in the summer of 2022 under a contract with DLCD to prepare the draft climate-friendly areas methods guide. Many of you have probably seen that. It's out there on the DLCD website. Ever since we did the draft, DLCD has been updating that and sort of keeping it current with the learned experience now that people are actually doing some of this work. That is done as far as LCOG is concerned. The second part of work that LCOG has been involved in is currently underway. We have an IGA with DLCD to provide technical support, primary staffing for the climate-friendly areas studies for both the city of Eugene and the city of Springfield. And we're working both with Eugene and Springfield to go through their requirements for the climate-friendly area analysis, looking at the suitability of the areas, spatial demographic analysis, the equity and anti-displacement analysis, policy and code analysis, capacity analysis, lots of other sort of technical work that our staff is working with the 2 cities on. We are different. LCOG is different than Metro in that we don't have the land use authority. We aren't actually directly subject to any of the requirements and the rules. So LCOG is acting more in a consultant role, if anything, for the local communities in our area, in our metropolitan area that are subject to the rules. That current work with Eugene and Springfield is about 50% of the way done, and we expect to wrap that up this summer. The third area, we haven't started, well, actually, I guess in a way we have started with, but LCOG is still developing the draft IGA with Brian Hurley at ODOT. It's pretty much done, and we actually have started a little work on LCOG's role to really be a regional facilitator for what we have to do under the scenario planning requirements for the Eugene Springfield metropolitan area. Our metropolitan area was subject back in, well, it culminated in 2015. We were required to develop a preferred scenario, but not formally adopt it and not do anything more than develop and identify that preferred scenario. We did that in 2015, and now we jump forward to today, and what we're going to start with is that preferred scenario from 2015 and work with our communities to see if there needs to be any adjustments to it on the policy side or the technical side or anything else. And hopefully move that preferred scenario forward to actual adoption and then implementation. So LCOG's role in this is that we're going to be really working on developing the work plan over the next 2 years to accomplish that. We are going to be working initially on the governance structure. There's some questions about that, and that's actually due by the end of June. So that's the work we've already started is having a regional governance structure for us to get to an adoption of a preferred scenario. We're going to be working on just generally jurisdictional coordination, stakeholder engagement, public engagement. We're going to be working a lot on looking at the performance measures then. Once we have the preferred scenario nailed down, we're going to be working on performance measure metrics and future year targets. And to do that, LCOG will be working on a lot of modeling work, which may be of the most interest to you. We'll be doing regional travel model progress testing against the scenario and the targets. And I think one of the most exciting things perhaps for this group is that part of the work program that, again, we're finalizing with ODOT right now is that LCOG is going to update our existing green step model to the most recent version of Vision Eval. So we'll be working what we expect to be Vision Eval RSPN 3.0 and bringing that to bear on this work. Testing it maybe with some City of Eugene work that the city is independently doing, but really trying to get to a full Vision Eval model that we can use for implementing the adopted scenario, and then for moving forward with all the other modeling that LCOG does for the MPO and the local jurisdictions. I realize that was pretty quick. Like I said, I'm just here standing in for somebody. That was a quick rundown of what we're doing in our area, but I'll try to answer any questions if there are any.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Thank you. If you have one question or two questions, Paul.
I have a question, and it may, any of the jurisdictions here probably, I'm asking a similar question. And that is, climate-friendly areas are going to be boundaries, and they're going to upzone to allow certain things. Are there any actions, or how will we make things come together with the multimodal planning? And because this takes forethought, and maybe you're already thinking about that as to how that planning would occur to create multimodal areas. You've got transit agencies, all these pieces, but that's what you guys do as MPOs. So I'm wondering, what is the vision for bringing those pieces together? And maybe it's 2 steps ahead of, and you're worried about CFH right now, and that's fine. But I just wanted to so maybe Paul, start with you if you have any thoughts in that area.
I'm going to have to beg off that and not say that I have thoughts on that area yet specifically. We haven't really gotten to that level of discussion currently.
Kim and Tyler, you probably have the same doing CFAs, and maybe that's all you can see. Not the blinders at this point, but.
Well, the main thing I would say is I know that in the city of Bend is working to get a CFA area. They're going through that process right now. They're pretty tight, I think, in terms of what they're going to propose. The issue that's popping up is that some of the development that is ideal for the CFAs is already starting to move ahead of the city having to really work on the multimodal plan side with it. There's some real concern that we're going to start seeing really significant density without the thought, of the plan, the kind of front end planning. It's really needed to link it into adjacent neighborhoods and parts of the city. So I think I don't know where the city is with that, but I think it's a big concern for us locally.
Because retrofitting it is more challenging than
Absolutely. Yeah. We may get a lot of density, and we're not ahead of getting the mobile network really established. So there's a real livability concern about, a lot of density and it being still very car centric potentially, the lack of access to other things.
Yeah, and I think this is Kim. What I would add to that is I think our region has experienced that even with 24-day just zoning things to be climate friendly areas and putting the plans in place to have that happen isn't going to necessarily mean that that they're going to turn into that. Yeah, they aren't going to turn into that right away. You know, I think sometimes about Beaverton. It's a regional center. It's been a regional center since the 90s, served by light rail. Has good freeway access. It has, you know, neighborhoods that are well connected. But they also have arterial streets that are state highways that aren't the freeway system, and large areas that are basically zoned for higher density, but are still owned by car dealerships, and they haven't turned over. So there's, you know, things have been happening, but it doesn't happen fast. And, you know, so in our region, you know, that's just one example of that. And I can remember when I first started working for Metro, going out to Beaverton City Planning Commission, and their concerns at that time were about parking. You know, there wasn't transit at the levels that they thought were necessary to be able to support some of the parking minimums at that time that were in place. And then it also has happened that sometimes transit service routes change. And so there's some you know, things that we need to be mindful of about that. Circumstances change, sometimes not, you know, just, you know, the pandemic caused a lot of service changes, for example, and we need to be able to be flexible to that, as well as, you know, trying to move forward towards that broader vision and sort of acknowledge that it's not going to happen over time, over, you know, fast. It's going to be something that is going to evolve and happen gradually over time, you know, depending on the kinds of investments that can go with the planning work, and having a multimodal system is so critical to the success of those areas.
Great, thanks. To the extent that the state can help, trying to sort of bubble that up and think about it in a cross-cutting way. So, you don't have a bleeding edge of it. So, thanks.
And yeah, I think we'll just go right to.
I don't know how Cody kind of tag team. Oh, cool. Slide. So it was kind of two parts. I had to talk about rulemaking, and on the rulemaking side, I know that the LCDC will be considering some amendments to the CPAC rules tomorrow. Talk about it all, Cody.
Sure. They're connected. So there's this House bill, some concerns, you know, obviously the challenge to the in city, county introduced legislation to stay the rules. So the legislature engaged our agency and like, you know, concerned about this. Want you to go and, you know, make sure you're engaging these cities. When our commission adopted the rules, they did so with very explicit statements of like, you know, we're going to go back and, you know, correct things. So it's not just a one-off deal, it's not carved in stone. If you look at Division 44, there's a specific rule that requires the commission to go back and like we look at the targets and like do that every 4 years. So it's not really unique that like when we do rulemaking, there, you know, find things and go back and we correct them and learn over time. So we were already planning to do a corrections and clarifications rulemaking this year to make sure as we're implementing them, we're hearing more, we're learning more, we're correcting that. But really what happened was the legislature said we want, you know, to see some action here. So our legislative staff had been engaging with stakeholders to look at kind of a good faith effort to say, you know, we already have this thing planned, but here's good faith effort to show you, here's some temporary rules to have some corrections that we've heard so far that we think are, we would be making anyway. So those, there was the draft rules brought to commission in their packet, I think it's April 3rd, and then comment period is still open at the end of the commission meeting tomorrow. We are just releasing the updated draft based on what we heard, initial feedback. So we're bringing like kind of a hand carry to the commission. It's pretty minor tweaks to the April 3rd language, but it's really just reflective of what we heard in public comment so far. So those will go to commission tomorrow morning, and temporary rules are in effect for 180 days. And while they're in effect, we're going to be, having this rulemaking process where we're looking at, other things to clarify. Also, here's the temporary rules and these corrections. Those are on the table still, but we feel pretty confident that we've heard a lot of support for those changes. But those will also be just part of that process. I believe that it's the November commission meeting, the permanent adoption. That would be kind of like when the temporary rules expire. So it would be kind of repealing the temporary rules and then adopting the permanent set changes. So the sideboards are really just, hey, we're not changing the policy objectives here. We're in process improvement and making learns from implementers. And we're also just interested in hearing any other things that folks have issues with that might be more larger policy concerns like that. We're listening.
Any questions on that piece of it? So just a quick rundown of kind of where the city of Bend is. You can see on the right, they have a pretty detailed work program for the next July of this year, July of 2026, so a 3-year work program. They've summed it up into this pretty nice graphic that I can share with you. It lays out how they're going to get there in terms of all of these things. Some of the things that they are doing right now is they've already addressed the parking requirement changes. They've just simply eliminated parking requirements for all new development that a few months ago. They're working right now on some of the planning and code changes that are underway. I mentioned the PFA analysis, I think is pretty far along in the city, and it ties in really well with what they did when they updated their comp plan so many years ago. They identified what they called opportunity areas. And those opportunity areas, I think, at least a couple of those parts of their steel things that will line up pretty nicely. They're doing quite a bit of other work on some building blocks that go into this effort. They're updating their billable land inventory, housing needs analysis. We're working with them on updating some future baseline use data. The process we've got underway right now, and then the other thing that they are working on is they have a contract with DKS to be doing some preliminary spec modeling work. And, they're just getting started on that. So we will hopefully be bringing an update to the end of July on that work. That's all I have. Any questions?
Yeah, I kind of had a question before when you were talking about they got projects, they might have projects that go faster than like multiple pieces come up. You said they're looking pretty dense. I was just curious, are those example projects that you're thinking of, are they dense from a housing perspective, or do they also have a multimodal or a mixed use component? Like, is there employment density there, or is it just a housing density?
It depends. I mean, there's multiple projects. I understand they're planning these projects forward. There's one of the big ones. We'll have, I think, housing. There's others that are moving into, like, we have some big box areas in the city. There's some development proposals happening kind of in and around those areas that are solely housing, within kind of sea of big box stuff, and they're completely auto oriented, and walking and biking in those areas is quite challenging. So I think that's what the big concern is. Some of those are adjacent to the state highway system. They're not tied into the city's roadway network very well. That's
Is it a bridge? Or no?
No, it's on the other side of that, kind of between Highway 20 and Highway 7 up north and down.
Any other questions really any other CPAC related questions on what was presenting and what folks are doing? We're moving on. Including anyone online? Well, Very good. And so we're almost done here, but to kind of just open it up, if anyone did have anything they'd like to share before concluding the meeting, or I know on the agenda is any topic ideas for the next which is October 18th. Happy to hear those. Again, anything to share before concluding the meeting. While people are thinking that, I'm glad you brought that up. You know, the people that are in person, we're having kind of an after hours thing at 4:40, which is just across the street there. So if you're able to, definitely welcome you. Fortunately, don't have a call-in option.
Could put a speakerphone up, they could drink it home.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess, this is sort of an odd thing to bring up, but Peter Hurley passed away a month ago at this point. He was, at PBOT, was, a person that presented within the bodies here. So I just would be remiss without bringing up, his passing and his contribution to that a celebration of life. We're all pretty quirky people. Peter was also a quirky person, and it was really nice to share that, and lots of policy discussion, because that was very much in his floor. It seemed odd to be talking about that, the celebration of life, but that really was Peter. And so anyway, I just everyone should take their moment to be grateful for what Peter contributed to us. I think you were saying, hey, Peter pushed us into doing this earlier, and this is the right thing to do. I know he pushed the OTP as well. So anyway, happy to discuss that further, but I just wanted to honor his contribution.
We actually started the meeting with the moment of honor that he was after. Yeah, because he really did. If no one else is going to say anything, this is my moment to share information sharing. So ODOT, Transportation Planning Analysis Unit, has just published a new report. Well, I guess the second version of a newer report called the Congestion 2022 Statewide Congestion Overview. I encourage everybody to take a look at it. It's designed for leadership decision makers, so the language is relatively simple to the best of our ability, given that transportation can be quite complex. But it's a vehicle to understand the economics behind behavior. So if we have a lot of things to account for in our system, and if say GHG or safety was only one of them, we just close the highways, it'll be good. We can't do that. We have to accommodate a lot of different needs, a lot of different ways, for a lot of different reasons. And freight has a big component, and they're often overlooked because they're not like one entity with a one voice. And so this is kind of the story of that. We talk about congestion, we talk about reliability. There's a new section on safety, highlighting that pedestrian deaths are really climbing, and it's a concern. There's a little bit of an overview of the post-COVID pandemic patterns, and people want to know if we have to do everything over because the pandemic changed everything. We're trying to message that, saying, well, we'll do a survey, we'll find out what did change, what didn't. So it's kind of the story of our work here within plain language. And one of my favorite parts is we use a metro example, since we only grow as a state because of in-migration. We have to make it very clear to people that we have to accommodate growth. So if you say VMT can't ever go up, that's unrealistic, because people move here and they do stuff. And whether it's walking or biking or driving, they move. And we looked at the last 10 years of metro growth, where it's taking their proportion of the in-migration, which is a lot. It's like 40% of all people who come to Oregon end up in the Portland metro area. And then we estimate the number of trips that they generate. And from that, VMT generated just from new people, just to kind of try to tell the story in a simple way for people that are making decisions to understand. So you may find the information in that you can use.
when you're talking to decision makers to say, well, it's complicated. Look, look at this. And the idea is that we're going to produce this every 2 years, right before the long session, and try to cater it to the topics of the time. Maybe next time we'll have a big thing on polling, who knows what, but not COVID, hopefully. And then probably continue on the safety side, because I was really shocked to see the data on pedestrian bikes. So plug.
What's the title? Yeah, what's the name of
Oh, this is the 2022 statewide congestion overview, and we are going to be vigorously marketing this thing. It's actually quite late, but we wanted to get it right. So we're going to cover leadership with all of our partners, and that will include probably the OMSC. Well,
Definitely will include.
yes, it will. Well, yeah, I just kind of did that, but we'll do it one day. And as it goes to media, I'm getting strong statement from that is that e-commerce is taking off. Yeah, we even have registration over time, which shows you how the media structure. There's a lot of them, but mostly they're the ones that are lost very quickly. They're a smaller group. They're growing fast. So yeah. And if you weren't in here this morning, maybe more for the people online, there is an emissions website for the transportation sector. Emissions, it's really kind of an encapsulation of the STS, which is our roadmap to reduce those and how we're doing on those. So I think I put that in the chat for people online. Again, a kind of nice plain language.
Very good. So I guess, my as the vice chair, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. Drink. Thank you, everyone. Also on my.
Thank you. Have a good session. A good post-meeting session, I should say. Good seeing you all.
Yeah.
Nice seeing you all. Bye.